The Liv Intrigue's buttery smooth Maestro platform and DVO suspension had an insatiable appetite for Southwest Utah's chunky descents. With a price tag of $8,400, it's a hefty investment, but you get a highly customizable bike from one of the few brands still designing bikes around women-specific geometry.
The Liv Intrigue has 140 millimeters rear travel, 150 front, which feels like it would be a really big bike. And I was very pleasantly surprised on our XC loop that this bike was a lot snappier than what I expected. You know, this was, for me, one of the better bikes when it came to climbing up some of the technical ledgy stuff that we had.
Absolutely, I was able to clean a lot more of the loop on this bike than on other bikes, for sure.
Well, my first impression after riding it on the short travel loop was it needs to be ridden on the long travel. I think it's aggressively built. It's got wide tires, wide bars, the Geo's aggressive. I mean, this to me is more of a long travel bike than a short travel bike.
Right, it kind of falls in an interesting middle ground. We're having a hard time categorizing it in a way. Like, it's got enough travel that you can take it pretty much anywhere, but it's got kind of a slightly more aggressive head tube. My first descent on this was like a chunky fire road descent, which on most of the other bikes was slightly sketchy. And on this bike, it was like floating. It was so good.
The Maestro suspension is definitely, I really feel like excels on high-speed descents, chunky high-speed descents. It just smooths it out.
I always wonder at what point I'm going to learn, because every year we do the Bibles and every year I end up riding a Giant. And I'm like, oh yeah, the Maestro suspension is amazing. And that is exactly where it shines. And I was lucky enough to be able to take this bike and ride it at both the XC loop and then take it over to our loop for bigger travel bikes, where that was exactly what I found, is it performed very well on the XC loop, and then taking it over to the bigger ledges, it completely shined there.
I personally like climbing it more on, I think it's an okay climber. I felt like some of the...
Yeah, it's not the best and it's not the worst.
Yeah, it definitely excels more on descents, I think.
Oh,
some
absolutely.
Of the, some of the ledgier stuff, I just felt like in the slow speed, techie climbs, I felt like it was momentum sapping at times, and I kind of like couldn't get it moving forward.
And I feel like I could feel that suspension soaking things up. But for me, the high roller setup of one being a 2.4 and the other being a 2.5, I felt like that gave me enough grip. And then the suspension, the way it ended up working is I was able to pedal through on a lot of those ledgier climbs. So I know what you're talking about with feeling that momentum sapping a little bit, but I was able to, with that extra grip, I was able to keep the confidence going to just keep pedaling up, and made it enough that I was happy.
Yeah, and I actually, coming to this bike after riding the Bronson all morning, felt like it was a lot snappier and a lot more balanced as far as the geometry when you're like trying to push it up and over things. It struck me as a more versatile bike.
Like many modern trail bikes, the new Intrigue got a slacker head tube angle, a steeper seat tube angle, and a shorter rear triangle. This sits you back far enough to plow through rough sections and gives you fairly good responsiveness on climbs. We felt it held its own when going up, though the Intrigue is definitely happier descending. There is clearance for a 2.6 tire, which I actually think would be perfect on this bike. They use the carbon wheel with the 30 mil internal width. I thought that spec was really nice.
For the most part, I really like the spec on this bike. The one part I found confusing was the 100 millimeter dropper post.
Right.
This bike has enough room for a 150 or at least a 125.
Yeah.
It's built really aggressively. The 100 millimeter dropper post just made no sense.
Yeah,
And
I don't understand that.
And the actual function of it was mushy and not good. It was slow.
Yeah, it'd be nice if they, they use a proprietary, they use their house brand. It'd be nice if they spec something a little, more of a name brand dropper on this and a longer one. I think one of the things about this bike that was interesting is the DVO suspension. So and we were on the top of the line, advanced, it's $8,000, it's a lot. There's definitely lower levels of it, but on this particular model, they use the DVO suspension, which kind of comes from the the giant off-road race team. They partnered with DVO this year, and so we're seeing that suspension on some of the higher end bikes. Giant's worked really close, and Liv have worked really closely with DVO, so it's custom tuned for this bike, for this platform, and that's something you don't see very often. It's really tunable, like very tunable, and
so many settings.
Just like the high and low speed, and then there's the off the top, like you can adjust the sensitivity and
the setup's really different than other suspension systems that we've gotten used to, right?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, like, I was looking at the guide on my phone, and I mean, it took a lot of time to set this up, and I think it takes a few rides to kind of get it dialed the way you want it to. It's a bit more involved, I'd say, than other suspension, and I think that's a good, that's a good thing, obviously. I think it
for riders who are into that.
Well, it allows some versatility, and I think you can really dial in your suspension perfectly. But it is it's definitely something you have to spend a lot of time with.
I think there's riders, like we were talking about before, who appreciate a bike that they can just throw a leg over right out of the box and it'll pretty much ride fine. But then there's also riders who really like to customize what they do with their suspension. They might have different body types, they might have different riding styles, and I think this bike really caters to that rider for sure.
Yeah.
And one of my concerns about Liv is one of the few companies left that do still spec a completely different geometry for their women-specific bikes along with the touch points. And I'm always concerned about that because a lot of times they talk about women being smaller, them being lighter, and
less aggressive.
And we all know that there's plenty of stocky small women. We come in all different shapes and sizes. So I found that one of the advantages of this highly tunable suspension is you can make it exactly tuned to your specific way of riding.
Another thing Liv does along those same lines is the size range in this is extra small to large, which is really cool. It's really designed to fit a lot of different sizes of people. With highly tunable DVO suspension, a range of sizes, and a modernized balance geometry, the Liv Intrigue is a versatile and customizable bike for a wide range of body types. To read the full review and see how the other contenders in our Bible of Bike test stacked up, head over to bikemag.com.